Right now, as you are watching this, the forecast for the next 7 days across the middle of the United States has turned into something meteorologists themselves are calling unusually complicated, and in some spots, outright bizarre. Parts of North Dakota woke up in the upper 30s this week. Within days, one forecast model run is showing actual air temperatures, not heat. Index, but real air temperatures as high as 115 degrees in parts of Nebraska and western Iowa. At the same time, a slow-moving front could dump up to 8 inches of rain on isolated pockets of the Mississippi Valley, while wildfire smoke drifting in from the Pacific Northwest is hazing over skies as far away as South Dakota and Iowa. And heading into the weekend, the two most trusted forecast models on the planet, the European model and the American GFS model, are not just disagreeing on details, they are producing almost opposite outcomes for the exact same days. This is the story of how the forecast for the coming week just turned very weird, why the models cannot agree, and what that uncertainty actually means for the millions of people caught in the middle of it. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the data and the meteorologists tracking it are actually saying. Drop a comment and tell me if you are in the zone this forecast covers, anywhere from the Central Plains to the Great Lakes. I read every one of these. If you want grounded, sourced weather breakdowns instead of panic headlines, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to see it before the pattern shifts again. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. The story starts with a cold front that, by most accounts, should not be producing this kind of chaos. According to meteorologist Max Schuster of Max Velocity Severe Weather Center, a stalled frontal boundary has been pushing slowly south and east across the central United States, and instead of clearing out in a day the way a normal cold front does, it has essentially parked itself, allowing repeated rounds of rain and thunderstorms to train over the same communities again and again. Early in the week, that meant rain and storms stretching from Iowa and Wisconsin through Illinois, Chicago, and Indianapolis, with some storms strong enough to produce large hail and damaging wind, and Schuster noting that even an isolated tornado could not be completely ruled out, though he described that specific risk as low. The bigger concern, by far, was flooding. The Weather Prediction Center placed a slight risk of excessive rainfall stretching from the Milwaukee and Chicago areas all the way west through Kansas City and Omaha. Most places in that zone were expected to pick up somewhere around half an inch to 1 inch of rain, but isolated communities, especially near St. Louis, Columbia, and Milwaukee, were flagged as possibly seeing 2 to 4 inches, with a few highly localized spots potentially approaching 6 to 8 inches before the pattern finally lets go. That is the kind of flooding that does not come from one dramatic storm. It comes from the ground slowly saturating over days until one more ordinary thunderstorm becomes the one that sends water into a street or a basement that was fine the day before. Then, almost on top of that flood threat, comes the opposite extreme entirely. While the Midwest deals with a stalled, soggy front, intense heat has been building across the southern plains and the desert southwest, with Dallas and Oklahoma City expected to approach 105 to 110 degrees. By Thursday and Friday, that heat is forecast to push north into the Great Plains, including South Dakota and Iowa, where afternoon highs could climb into the middle and upper 90s and, in some spots, cross the 100-degree mark. Here is where the forecast gets genuinely strange. One run of the GFS model, one of the two major forecast models meteorologists rely on, showed actual air temperatures. Again, not a heat index number inflated by humidity, but the real thermometer reading, reaching as high as 115 degrees across parts of Nebraska and western Iowa this weekend. Schuster's own reaction to that particular model output was blunt. He called it, in his words, insane for this time of year. To be clear, a single extreme model run several days out is not treated as a locked-in forecast, and Schuster was careful to caveat that this specific number should not yet be read as guaranteed. But even as an outlier, it tells you how much raw energy is loaded into this pattern, and how dramatically it could swing if the clouds and storms currently protecting parts of the plains fail to materialize. What makes all of this feel less like one weather event and more like several. Competing seasons happening at once is the cold air sitting right next to that building heat. Ahead of the heat surge, a strong cold front pushed unusually low temperatures into the northern plains and Midwest, with parts of North Dakota waking up in the upper 30s and low 40s, and spots in Nebraska and Wisconsin seeing morning readings in the upper 40s to the mid 50s. Afternoon highs in sections of the Midwest were stuck in the 60s and 70s, genuinely cool for the first week of August, while rain kept a few Nebraska communities hovering in the upper 50s to low 60s for highs. That is the part of this forecast that is hardest to wrap your head around. Some of the same general region that could be sitting under real 115-degree heat by the weekend was waking up needing a jacket just days earlier. The dividing line between that cold air and the building heat is exactly where meteorologists expect the flooding and severe weather risk to concentrate, because that is where the atmosphere has the sharpest contrast to work with, and sharp contrasts are what fuel strong storms. And that dividing line is precisely where the forecast models fall apart from each other for the weekend. The European model, generally considered the more reliable of the two for medium-range forecasting, shows a line of thunderstorms developing over Iowa on Friday and tracking through Missouri and Illinois, with Saturday and Sunday calming down afterward. The American GFS model tells a nearly opposite story: relatively limited severe weather Friday, followed by a low-pressure system forming over South Dakota and northern Nebraska during the weekend. A setup that could instead trigger significant organized severe storms across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the upper Midwest, with additional systems potentially following into Monday and Tuesday. Schuster put the uncertainty as plainly as a meteorologist can. It could easily be stormy, he said, or it could just be brutally hot and very humid. That is not forecaster hedging for the sake of covering himself. August weather is genuinely harder to predict than other times of year, precisely because it depends less on one big, well-organized storm system and more on small-scale disturbances, the kind of subtle shifts in wind or moisture that often do not become clear until you're only a day or two out, which is exactly why the map on this one could still change significantly before the weekend arrives. On top of the flooding, the heat, and the cold air colliding with all of it, there's a fourth ingredient working through the same region: wildfire smoke. Ongoing fires across Idaho, Oregon, and Washington continue sending smoke eastward into the Central Plains and Midwest. For most communities east of the Rockies, that smoke should stay high enough to mainly produce hazy skies rather than dangerous air quality at ground level, but parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa could see some of it settle closer to the surface, worth watching if you have asthma or another lung condition. The smoke even complicates the temperature forecast itself in a small way, since it can block enough sunlight to slightly affect how hot the ground gets on a given afternoon, one more variable layered on top of an already crowded forecast. It is also worth noting this is not happening in a vacuum. This same August has been unfolding under a strengthening El Niño, pattern that forecasters at NOAA and the International Research Institute for Climate and Society have flagged as developing unusually fast this year, with some model guidance suggesting it could reach levels strong enough to qualify as a genuine super El Niño by later this year. That background signal does not directly explain a single stalled front or one strange model run, but it does help explain why this summer's forecasts keep producing these sharp, close-together contrasts, unusually warm signals across huge stretches of the country, layered against pockets where the atmosphere still finds a way to swing hard in the other direction. Meteorologists have been describing the broader pattern behind this El Niño as capable of launching disturbances deep into the mid-latitudes in ways that make this kind of week-to-week volatility more likely, not less, which is part of why a normal early August cold snap and a normal early August heat dome ended up landing in almost the same week, in almost the same stretch of the country. So what does all of this actually mean if you live anywhere between the Central Plains and the Great Lakes over the next several days? The honest answer is that meteorologists are not asking you to prepare for one specific outcome, because there genuinely is not one yet. They are asking you to stay ready for several. If you're in the flood zone between Kansas City, Omaha, Chicago, and Milwaukee, know how you would respond if water started rising near your home or the roads you normally drive, especially since this kind of slow, repeated rainfall can turn dangerous with very little warning on any single night. If you are anywhere from Texas up through the Dakotas, treat the heat forecast seriously, even with the uncertainty attached to the most extreme numbers, because even the more conservative end of this forecast, afternoons in the middle and upper 90s, is still genuinely dangerous heat for early August. And if you are in that narrow band where the cold air and the heat are colliding, from the Dakotas down through Nebraska and Iowa, that is the zone forecasters are watching most closely for whatever the weekend actually decides to do, whether that turns out to be organized severe thunderstorms or simply more heat holding on longer than it should. The honest, grounded summary is this: a stalled frontal boundary has spent the past several days dragging repeated rounds of rain and thunderstorms across the same stretch of the Midwest, raising a real flash flood risk from Kansas City to Milwaukee. At the same time, a heat dome is building from Texas northward through the plains, with one forecast model run suggesting real air temperatures could reach as high as 115 degrees in Nebraska and Iowa this weekend. A number of meteorologists themselves are calling extreme even by August standards. A sharp cold front pushed unusually low temperatures into the northern plains just days before that heat, creating the kind of stark air mass contrast that tends to fuel dangerous storms. And heading into the weekend, the two leading forecast models genuinely disagree on whether that contrast produces a significant severe weather outbreak or simply more heat and humidity, with wildfire smoke from the Pacific Northwest, adding haze and localized air quality concerns on top of everything else. This is not one storm moving predictably across the map. It is several different weather patterns competing for the same real estate at the same time, and that is exactly why this forecast turned so weird. We are going to keep tracking this the same way we did today, straight from the Weather Prediction Center, the actual model data, and meteorologists like Max Schuster, who are willing to say plainly when a forecast is genuinely uncertain rather than pretending. It is settled. Subscribe so you do not miss how this resolves, because based on everything we just walked through, the picture could look very different by the time the weekend actually gets here. And leave that comment below. Tell me whether your week is starting cold, hot, wet, or all three. Because based on this forecast, that answer might depend entirely on which side of the line you happen to live on. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.